Hi, everyone.
Greetings. We're in chapter 12, is it? From
Pure
the
Worship,
Pure Worship book.
page 129.
And this section I'm going to be reading from the screen and Vivian from the book, so I will look at least a little distracted. But here we go. We'll dive into I will make them one nation. And here it needs to be said right away. We're taking a fragment of one verse, which they then reference beside it, Ezekiel 37, verse 22. And they say that the focus of this chapter 12 is Jehovah's promise to collect his people together, the prophecy of the two sticks. So you need to know in advance, if you read it, which we will partly do today, what are the two sticks? Well, it's Israel and Judah, the two former segments that were in rebellion. Well, the north was in rebellion against the south, etc., the 10 tribes against the two. That's what the text is about, and that's we'll see that when we get around to reading it. But here they want you to look only at this phrase from 37:22. I will make them one nation. And here's their intro, 2 paragraphs. Under divine direction, Ezekiel has conveyed a number of prophecies to the exiles in Babylon by means of visible signs. The first prophecy acted out by Ezekiel contained a judgment message. The second one also. The third one too, and so on. And then they reference Ezekiel 3, Ezekiel 4, Ezekiel 5, and Ezekiel 12. In fact, all the prophecies that he has acted out by signs have conveyed messages of fierce judgment against the Jews. Imagine, therefore, how alarmed the exiles must be when Ezekiel again takes his position in front of them, ready to act out another prophecy. What devastating message will we receive this time, they must think. But they're in for a surprise. The prophecy that Ezekiel now begins to act out is very different. It contains not a dark judgment, but a bright promise. What message does Ezekiel convey to the exiles? What is its meaning? How does it affect God's servants today? Notice that transition from the meaning to the exiles 2,600 years ago. How does it affect God's servants today? Let us find out. So I guess the first thing I want to bring out is that this last sentence is so typical of their judgmentalism towards Israel. It says, in fact, all the prophecies that he has acted out by signs have conveyed messages of fierce judgment against the Jews. And of course, have you already forgotten about Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Nahum, and so on? All the prophets that are now in our Bibles, all 17 of them are Jews. Israelites, actually, specifically, most of them being from Judah, but not all of them. So when you make this generalization about they're conveying messages of fierce judgment against the Jews, already you're putting into the JW mind that God's dealings with Israel are over.
Yeah.
And by the time you get to the end of paragraph 2, that gets clear, because then you transition to what does it mean to God's servants today.
Yeah.
They've skipped over 2,600 years.
And it's a quick transition to steal whatever good things are said, because that's what they say is after this. We'll steal those for us. We're his people. So the his people, even that way of phrasing it, shifts you from thinking it could be the Jews.
Yeah. Here we need to do a reassessment of what we've seen in Ezekiel so far up to chapter 37, which is, you have said that so far it's been mostly judgment against the Jews. The actual numbers, though, is 24 chapters of judgment against Israel, the first 24, one half of the book, and then 8 chapters against their neighbors.
Yeah.
For what reason are the 8 chapters against their neighbors? For their treatment of the Jews. And then you get to the last third of the book, the last 16 chapters, which is all promises to the same people who committed these heinous sins that brought them into exile.
Yeah. And it's a hopeful message at that point.
Yeah.
Of redemption of the people.
Yeah. So,
and much of it was, like, I don't know in this book, we're going to see whether they miss or neglect the same portions of Scripture that they neglected, and I would suspect they do. But they just neglected whole sections of the latter part of Ezekiel that was hopeful.
we're going to see in the rest of this chapter that they, again, do what they always do, which is cherry pick the chapter to find the verses that they want to reference. Not always quoting them. Here's a good example. You're not quoting even the entire verse that you use as your basic text. I will make them one nation. Let's read the whole context of that verse, which is in the original chapter 37, verses 20 to 30. Well, 20 to what?
20 to 28.
20 to 28. So we'll read all 9 of those verses from the New World Translation.
The sticks that you write on should be in your hand for them to see. Then tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. I will take the Israelites from among the nations where they have gone, and I will collect them together from every direction and bring them to their land. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king will rule over all of them, and they will no longer, nor will they be divided any longer into 2 kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves with their disgusting idols and their detestable practices, and all their transgressions. I will save them from all their unfaithfulness by which they have sinned, and I will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I myself will be their God. My servant David will be their king, and they will all have one shepherd. They will walk in my judicial decisions and carefully observe my statutes. They will dwell on the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, where your forefathers lived, and they will dwell on it forever, they and their children and their children's children. And David my servant will be their chieftain forever. And I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an eternal covenant with them. I will establish them and make them many, and place my sanctuary among them forever. My tent will be with them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. And the nations will have to know that I, Jehovah, am sanctifying Israel when my sanctuary is in their midst forever. Wow.
Can you see why they would take a fragment of one verse out of this?
Yeah.
I will make of them one nation. Even the verse they take it from, if you just read it in its entirety, you would know what's wrong with your narrative, which is in the ESV it says, I will make them one nation in the land. You left that inconvenient phrase out.
Yeah.
On the mountains of Israel. Highly inconvenient.
Yeah.
And one king shall be king over them all. This is an earthly scene. Who's the king who's going to be king over Israel in the land, on the mountains of Israel?
I mean, it's very specific even about the land by referencing it to their own people. So Jacob and your forefathers, the land I gave them. There's nothing else you can do but believe that.
And it starts, of course, with the regathering of a people that have been scattered among the nations. For what reason have they been scattered among the nations? Well, the rest of the book tells you that. Because of their unfaithfulness. It's the same people. But
the plan is to redeem them so that they stop these things. They're cleansed. But it's all to do with God, not them.
And what's the bottom line? What's the end run of all of this? That not only Israel will know who he is, and decisively, but the nations too, looking on, will know who he is.
And he says at the very last line, I, Jehovah, am sanctifying Israel. I don't even know if we know what sanctifying means when we're witnesses. Do you think they know? Like, I don't remember using that phrase much.
They'd have a rough idea. It has something to do with making holy, maybe? Well, there's the solution to the problem of their perennial backsliding, is he's going to himself make them holy one day.
That's
he
right.
will shepherd them himself.
And that's the way in which the nations will know his power and his promise keeping.
Yeah, his faithfulness.
Yeah. It's by what he does. So I would say, as witnesses, we should think about whether or not we ever open the Bible and just read a Bible book. Do we ever open and read Ezekiel? I never did when I was a witness. I read the Ezekiel commentary, the book they gave, and maybe looked up the cherry-picked verses.
And even the chapters they left out, you didn't notice.
Yeah. Yeah, it was when I was doing my research that I realized, hey, I want to know what this means. It seems pretty plain to me. They just don't talk about those verses.
Yeah,
They didn't in the Green Book.
I have to say about this book, which is about half the length of the original book that Fred Franz wrote, right? But they've at least made an effort to put something from the missing chapters in here, although they do what we've already identified, the cherry picking,
little bits.
So you don't get the picture at all.
Yeah. So we should think, do I ever read it as a whole? And do I ever read it without putting myself in it? I think as witnesses, we habitually put ourselves in text because that's the way the Watchtower does it. So you do it kind of automatically after a while.
True. What's our link?
We're linking to, from our Paradise Lost series, we'll link the playlist as well. But number 10, Isaiah 54:55, divorced or eternally saved.
I don't think we've ever linked that one before, but
No.
it's a juicy meditation on 2 chapters of Ezekiel that are generally ignored by the church as well as by Jehovah's Witnesses. See you next time.